back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I'm Josh Hallman.
And today we have a very special guest, ActTwoWriter, writer of AIR, directed by Ben Affleck, Alex Convery, one of our favorite guests.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Applause.
Hello, thank you for having me again. It's great to see your guys' faces, although this is a audio format, I suppose.
It's still good to see you, Alex. So we're going to talk about AIR. A lot has happened since the last time we talked to you. I think we were just talking about before the podcast. It was about 2 years ago, and it was before AIR went into production. And so a lot happens after that. Not only the process of production itself and how that changed sort of the script and all that good writing stuff, but also just what it's like as a writer to ride that wave of what AIR then became, and the career afterwards. So we're going to dive into that if that's cool with you. But please go listen to the other interview we did with Alex as setup if you haven't heard his story about where he comes from and how AIR came to be. That's a really good one as well. But we're going to launch into post-AIR life.
Wow. How exciting.
Let's do it.
I'm excited. Okay, let's just jump in. AIR released April 2023. Just talk us through what that experience was like as it's coming out into theaters, your family's getting ready, your friends, just like it's your first thing that's ever been theatrically released. Just talk us through that.
You feel like everything all at once, like it's obviously incredibly exciting, and you kind of feel like this is what I've been working forever for, like it is that just sort of, wow, I have a movie coming out. At the same time, it's also, it's super overwhelming too, like everything in Hollywood. There's no textbook, there's no, here's how you do it, and every project and every movie coming out is so different, in terms of how it went into production, and then like when it's coming out, what format now, is it in theaters, is it streaming, on and on and on, that it was, I just think back to that time, last year, April 2023, and it was a month I may never have again, but it also was like so overwhelming at the same time. Kind of the inside baseball part too is like the strike was coming right down the pike on May 1st. So there was also just that sort of industry-wide panic of is this going to happen? We need to get this draft of this project in. And it was just, it was a wild time. It's a common thing, like I feel like in life with big and small things of like, life is going to be very long, hopefully, but there are just certain things that aren't going to happen very often, like a movie coming out. And there's always that part of you that's like, I just go back and like be in the moment. And it's funny because leading up to the movie, I heard that a lot, obviously the way the movie came together it came together very quickly and fast. And it was my first project. So there was like wow, this is such a dream element to it. But at the same time, I cannot tell you how many times I heard, enjoy, kid, like this isn't going to happen on the next one. Like, you don't get used to this feeling. And like, I appreciate that and totally get it. But at the same time, there was the sort of like, man, it's easy to be cynical in Hollywood, like it is, there was that part of it too. So yeah, a long answer to your short question, but it was all the emotions is probably the best way I could put it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask if you became obsessed with like looking up reviews as the movie came out and like Googling yourself, or did you like let that part of it go?
I had to learn very quickly that that's not a healthy thing. We had again, just back in that category of every movie is different. We had a festival premiere at South by Southwest. So there was that initial string of, I don't know, like 10 reviews, right? However many critics are at South by Southwest. And I remember, like we premiered the movie. There was a small kind of after party for like cast and crew and everything. And then I just remember getting back from that, and we were in the lobby of the hotel I was staying at with like all the producers and everyone. And we were just like updating like Twitter and like Variety, like waiting for the review to come out. And that was just, it was a really cool thing. I'll always remember, like there were a lot of good reviews. Luckily, there were some bad ones too. But it was that sort of, it felt like, I don't know, like the old days, like waiting for the newspaper to come out to see like if people liked it or not, But then very quickly, I mean, like a wide release movie, you're going to have like hundreds and hundreds of reviews. And I just think you'll drive yourself crazy if you read every single one. And like everything in life, and maybe this is just me, but you take the bad ones so much worse than like the low of the bad review is so much worse than the high of the good review, like it is that sort of imposter syndrome thing where it's like, well, the good review, like I tricked these people, like they didn't fit, they just didn't see the flaws in it, and the bad ones, it's like, oh God, they're right, like they see the truth of it, so that you just have to avoid that stuff.
That's definitely not just you. That's definitely me as well. So like as you got the bad reviews, like how did you manage that? Like did you spiral and like, oh God, like those are all the writing flaws that I should have fixed, or anything like that, or did you like, okay, I need to just healthily stop looking at these?
Yeah, it's the latter. I mean, it's just you can't go and change the movie, like it's the movie's done. So what good does the bad review have? It's like, and it is that classic thing of like they're not reviewing the screenplay, they're reviewing the finished movie, and it is that classic. I mean, if there's any lesson on that I really took away from the movie, it is that sort of like, yeah, they were right. In film school, you do make a movie 3 times, truly, and it's each process is so different, and the movie can change so dramatically. And I had a good experience, but so, when you're reading a bad review, it is sort of like you do almost want to chime in and be like, well, they didn't, let me tell you about this part, or like what happened that to lead to that. And that's just not healthy. I think the tough thing is in today's day and age, like we're saying, it's not like you can just go throw the newspaper away, like you can literally refresh Letterbox at any time, and it's like, well, all right, fresh reviews up, from like random people around the world who have no idea that they could be 13 years old, so it's just I just had to stop that very quickly because it isn't healthy, and you could do it, you could do it all day. It was the same thing with like award season, and kind of like the prognostication of like that whole kind of cottage industry within the film industry is just so taxing, because it's like there's an update every single day, and it's like new, odds and polls and this and that, and it's just, look, at the end of the day, like my job's to write, like and it always gets back to just being process focused and not results focused. It's just like you just got to get back to the work at some point.
So in a minute, I definitely want to dive into, what your work life is like now in like your process and everything like that. But going back to like, by the way, AIR's fantastic. I feel like probably sent you some text messages, but we've never like,
thank you. I appreciate
publicly, it has to be announced on the podcast. What was like, because it was a very collaborative experience, it seems like, in the sense of once you guys got rolling, and I think that's what you had talked about in some interviews. And like, I guess, is there anything you learned from that collaborative experience from a screenwriting point of view that you took away?
We had such a unique process in that it was a spec script, to start. So there was that, it wasn't like an OWA I just got hired on, and let me back up a little bit, I guess I should say. And like, we went through that process first of, because it was a spec script, having to pick the production company and the producers on the project. So in and of that process, I was already kind of prepping to do a rewrite. I had already, because of that, been introduced to the real subjects that I had written about in the spec script. And obviously those conversations added to my rewrites, and there was that sort of, okay, now I'm going to put in this part and that part, and like, this is important to Sonny to get this part in. So I was already kind of like in motion in terms of doing it. It wasn't a full rewrite. It was like what you call a polish. Or a character pass in certain places. And then Ben and Matt came on, and that obviously changed everything for the project, just in terms of we suddenly had a window that we had to shoot the movie in, so we were kind of, prior to that, we were living in the space of like, let's just get the script done, and like, let's go about this process in like a very measured way. And then all of a sudden, you Ben Affleck and Matt Damon come on, and they're like, we have 6 weeks that we can shoot this together between June and July. And it's like, so we have to go. So we were doing everything all at once, like there wasn't even time to like stop and blink or anything. It was like we were simultaneously rewriting the script in pre-production, but also trying to find a studio to finance the movie, so it was like all 3 of these things were happening simultaneously. And of course, on the rewrite part, like Matt and Ben went and did their pass of the script. And yeah, that was scary, of course. I mean, there is that just sort of natural power imbalance. I'm a first-time screenwriter, and they're going to have like a Matt Damon. But again, I think that's where, as you guys know from the last time we talked, like I'm such a believer in specking. I just think that is the screenwriter's ultimate superpower. And I do believe because AIR was a spec script, it kept me protected, not to say there was anything like, I don't know, nefarious or like anyone was trying to kick me off the project or anything, but it was just sort of like, it was a spec and like I had done the research and like, we were on such a tight timeline that I don't think there was even time for like, should we go find another writer, like it was a really helpful thing. And again, like it's just at the end of the day, when it's a spec, until you sell the script, like it's yours, and that's a really, really valuable thing for a screenwriter because always, like, as you guys know, like the writer's always the first one. They're like, like how can we screw the writer? Like
sure.
I'm joking, but at the same time, there is that sort of like, you're the first person that gets, I would say, like kind of forgotten once the movie is into pre-production and then production. So yeah, I mean, look, it was, I mean, I'll never forget getting that, like, just the draft back from Matt and Ben and like that sort of, I wouldn't even call it nervousness, but just that anticipation of like, okay, well, now I'm going to open this email and open this PDF and see what my script has become, like it's a very bizarre feeling.
I'd love to talk about that moment because recently I've also had some producers who are creative producers who get in there on the script and they make changes, and getting it back is always really interesting. And I think a really huge learning experience. And obviously Matt and Ben are fantastic writers and have been doing this a very, very long time. Can you talk about some of the things that you're like, oh shit, like they changed that for the better, and that is a really good writing lesson I'm going to now take with me moving forward? Any lessons you learned from opening that PDF?
Yes, well, it really solidified my belief that there's a difference between writing a spec, which I call writing to be read, because it is, when you write a spec, it's going to live as a written document first and foremost. You're not writing it for a studio. You're not writing it for a director or an actor. You are writing it for someone to read and say, we're going to make this movie, or we want to rep you, or we're going to go hand it off to this actor. And that's a really specific thing, right? Where it is sort of, the read has to be flawless. Like it has to be page turning. You want your voice to really be in there. It is sort of like, it should be its own separate thing. I believe like spec scripts, like they should be just as readable as a good book, like you should be able to bind and print it and put it on the bookshelf. Writing to be produced is a whole different thing, right? Like it's just sort of like, hey, we're going to go shoot this thing in 4 months. Like we don't really, like we don't need this sort of stage direction. Like let's just keep it sparse, bare bones, and let's just focus on like what's going to be on the screen, which I think I mean, look, obviously that's really important. So there is that sort of like, it just solidified for me the difference between the two, and I still believe in writing to be read very strongly when you're speccing or when you're just trying to get a project up and off the ground. But then, kind of the practicalities of producing a movie inevitably kind of trickle into the process. And it's like, we have to cut that. We have to cut this. Why are these two scenes in two different locations instead of the same location? We can slash X amount of dollars off the budget if we just set these two scenes, in the same place. So it becomes a whole different conversation, like when you're speccing, it's just such blue sky, it's like you can do anything quite literally. And then suddenly, you have a line producer and there's a budget and it is like, yeah, I mean, just to be blunt about it, like money just enters the conversation, because you start to like ask like, where do we want to spend the money and where can we cut back on it? That being said, I still think it is like the tenets of any great script and any great movie are a great character, and that it was cool to see like in the production process that like really enter the main stage, and it is sort of like we need to give this character like their big movie star moments, and like I was thinking about that when I was speccing the script, but even more so like when we were actually like Matt Damon is going to perform this, or Chris Tucker is going to perform this, so like let's make it a movie. I think that was very central to Ben as well, not to speak for him, but like again, I don't think it's a coincidence that this was AIR was supposed to be just a streaming movie on Amazon, and there was a big push behind it to go put it on the big screen, even though it was just people in rooms talking, because like there was such a focus on how can you make that cinematic? You know, how can you make these moments feel big, even though they're just in a boardroom or even though it's just two characters standing in an office, you know, like, and I really believe that, you know, like, especially the bigger and bigger movies become, I honestly think, like, we have to revert to, like, thinking smaller and smaller, if that makes sense, in terms of, like, you know, a great third act set piece can just be two people sitting across the table from each other. You know, it doesn't have to be just because you have the budget to say, and now in the third act, the world is going to end, you know, doesn't mean you should, you know, it's like, does that actually enhance the drama and stakes to the characters? So it was cool to see, like, on what I always thought was just a very, very, very small script that would be made for like under $10 million and maybe would have one big actor in it. It was cool to see that sort of script given, like the movie star treatment, you know, like with a huge cast and with a, you know, total A-list top, you know, from the top of the call sheet to below the line. I mean, it was such an like educational experience, if nothing else, for me.
Yeah. And when you talk too about giving your characters movie star moments or, you know, like trailer moments, they say a lot. How is that now circling back to as you're writing your own stuff, your own specs? Do you feel like you're writing scenes differently? Can you just talk a little bit more about like how that may have changed how you approach a scene with your characters?
This is probably going to be anticlimactic for you guys and all of your listeners, but like, I don't think my writing process has changed that much, you know, like today's the state of the business and it's ever changing. It's like, it's so tough out there and it's so hard to get any sort of, especially on the, you know, the feature side specifically, which is, you know, mostly where I'm working. The way to get a movie made is to have a movie star say, I want to be in this movie, you know, like, I mean, look, there's a million different ways to make a movie, but I would say like the surest path to production or to selling a script is like, you know, is attaching a movie star. I'm speaking from a biased experience because that's what happened with AIR. But regardless, when I'm, you know, even now when I'm talking to younger writers who, you know, are like, how do I get repped? How do I get a movie made? It's like, you know, like, is your protagonist or antagonist, would an A-list movie star want to play that character, you know? Mm-hmm. And how can you prove that? Ideally within the first 20 pages of the script, if it's a spec, you know, and like, what is the movie star moment? What is the big monologue? Like, like, why can't, like, think of this, let's say this movie is going to get nominated, you know, get them nominated for an Oscar. Like, what scene are they putting in the Oscar clip? Just because it's, you know, whatever, even if it's a Marvel movie, like, why not? You know, like, you should always be thinking about it in that way because it's someone performing it, whether the budget is, you know, sub $1 million or sub 100 million, you know, it's like, it's who wants to be in this movie, who wants to make it, you know, that is almost always the most important question.
Yeah, I remember one of my specs, we were having trouble getting a male lead. It was a female-driven movie, and we really needed the pair in order to get the financing. And so producers had me add a scene at the top with the male lead. They're like, we may cut this later, but it gives them something in the first 5 pages that's a speech, that's something they can get excited about, and that's just kind of like a trick of the trade, basically.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it does kind of come down to, like, I mean, look, it's like a well-trodden, like, kind of joke at this point that, like, if an actor's up for a role, they're just going to flip through the script and look at all their, you know, specific lines. Like, you know, I think that's being a little tough on actors, but like, why not think of it that way, right? I mean, you should be able to point to, like, even again, if it's a supporting role, it's like, this is your scene, you know, this is your moment. And you know, you want to make, like I always say, like, the way I think about supporting characters is you should be able to turn the camera and be like, in another world, this person could be the protagonist of their own movie, you know? And it's like, they have to be interesting enough. And that starts with the writing, right? Like the characters, one of the biggest sins I think you can commit as a writer is like all the characters to sound the same, you know? Like, you want to be very clear with the reader and the audience, sort of what's at stake for each character and like what their inner life is like. And you know, just make them pop in their own specific way, even if it's just like one little gag that repeats that kind of mini arcs over 4 scenes in the movie, you know, like, that sounds like really sort of like, you're just like, you know, slipping something in there quick for like a supporting role, but it can make all the difference in the world. You know, I really believe that. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling now, but it does make me think, like, you know, I remember thinking about I'm so big on character intros, and like how you introduce a character, I just think, especially in a spec script, but almost in any script, is so vitally important. You know, it's like, how do I show the reader and the viewer, hopefully, ultimately, who this character is? And it should all be character through action. You know, it's like, what are they doing when we meet them that tells me exactly who this person is, and you know, ultimately, like, what's at stake for them in this movie. And then, like, look, if you're going to be big on character intros, you have to be big on character outros as well. You know, like, when I'm breaking a movie, it's like, if you can tell me the first image of a character and the last image of that character, and you nail those two things, you have a movie. You know, like, that's the character's journey in two images. And like, if you can tell me those two things, like, I'm simplifying it, but the rest of the movie can kind of work itself out, you know, like, as long as those two things are clear. And then you just go down the list for all the characters. I mean, you know, again, you go back to AIR, and it's like, AIR ends with little vignettes of every single character. That wasn't necessarily in the original script, but that is, Ben particularly, like, thinks about character a lot in that way. Argo, he does the same thing. And I have taken that with me of, like, yeah, first image, last image, you know, for each character. And it's like, even the smallest supporting character, if you can tell me those two things, then boom, like, you know, they start to come alive in a way that, you know, like when you're typing dialogue, like, random Nike exec number 4, like, that's boring, you know, like, how can you give that person the name and just give them two scenes and tell their own little story?
Yeah, that's such good advice, because I do think writers tend to just use those secondary characters as just tools for our main characters to do things that they need to do, or just like to bounce their dialogue off of,
Yes.
rather than actually giving them their own personality, their own entrance. But then, yes, when you get to having to cast that role, I've been in this place where I'm like, oh shit, I'm embarrassed to present this script to this actor to ask them to be this secondary character, because there's nothing here. I have to beef this up. And then I realize I should have beefed that character up long before this anyways, just for the sake of the script. And that has always been a really good lesson to me too. That's great advice.
No, and it's funny. I mean, I like, this may feel like really, I don't know, dark things, but like, I feel like you go about life that way a little bit too, you know? Like, I just remember when I had my office job, it's like, oh yeah, that's Steve down the hall, you know, like, and it's just kind of like that, like, in your movie, like, that's just Steve down the hall, but Steve has his own very, like, deep inner personal life and is going through all these impossible things we have no idea about. So it's like, how can you extrapolate that if, you know, your life is a screenplay? It's like, how can you extrapolate that and make that character interesting? And there's a million little tricks to do it, you know, like, I used one of my tried and true ones in AIR, you know, it's like, guess what? It's this character's birthday. Like, why? Because I need to make them interesting. You know, it's like, it's like the cheapest trick in the book, but like, when all else fails, I think it works, because it's like, what are they asking for their birthday? What are they expecting? You know, like, the older you get, the more kind of complex and interesting a birthday becomes. So it's like, you know, look, I mean, and like, I can't prove this, but I think that's like where the Shane Black Christmas trick comes from. You know, it's like, it's like, how do I make an action movie interesting and different? Well, like, what if it's set around Christmas? Because like, just putting that template over the movie, it gives you a very easy vessel to like start to reveal inner workings of characters, right? Because like, Christmas is different for everyone, and everyone has, like, you know, different plans for Christmas and family for Christmas and gifts that they have to get for Christmas. And it's like, look, that little thing just brings such great specificity to the entire cast of characters. So, you know, again, it's just like those kind of like stupid little human tricks that you're applying to like the supporting cast down the line. But you know, I do think it works when all else fails.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to steal that birthday trick.
The birthday thing is a good trick.
I'm just going to, and it's going to be everyone's birthday in my next script.
Yeah, I mean, they do it in Moneyball, you know? It's like, he goes to Billy Bean goes to Fenway Park to like meet with the owner of the Red Sox. And like, so it's like, it's my assistant's birthday today. And it's like, I was like, I know Steve Zalian or Sorkin was like struggling with that scene. Like, I've seen it before. It's the birthday trick, you know? Like, but it works. It works every time, because it's such a specific thing, but it's also such a universal thing, right? Which is like, that's ultimately the secret to screenwriting is how do you make something very specific, it's universal, and typically the more specificity there is, the more universality there is. And like, a birthday, everyone has a birthday, everyone. So it's like, you check that off the box immediately, just like there's Christmas for everyone, you know, like obviously not everyone celebrates Christmas, but that time of year affects every person and every religion, like, you know, sort of the same way where it's like, all right, 25th of December, like, you know, the whole calendar kind of operates around it. So it's like finding those little things, you know?
So after Air happens, it's out. It's the greatest movie of all time. Do you jump into another spec, or what are your reps saying? Like, how did things change in terms of, I know your writing process didn't change, but like your approach to the next thing that you were going to write?
Yeah, it was I would like say it was a heady time, you know, where suddenly I feel like I came on like, you know, and talked with you guys 2 years ago and was like, always spec, like screw OWAs, like they're such a waste of time, like I'm done with them, and I'm only specking now, and it's funny to go back to that person 2 years ago because like my core belief hasn't changed, but I had to just relearn that myself, you know, and it is that sort of like, it's really easy when you don't have an opportunity to be like, I wouldn't say yes to that opportunity, like even if I had it, you know, because that's sort of like, I don't know, it's just really easy to turn things down hypothetically. And then, yeah, like you guys know, like you have a movie come out or like, you know, a big script go out and suddenly there's just like more opportunity available and you can take like a lot bigger meetings and you really just have to, then it's like, it's like, okay, like you're in the deep end, you know, it's like, now what do you really believe? You know, like I kind of found myself, having a lot of those look yourself in the mirror moments. And it's sort of like, I don't know, you go from this really interesting phase of like wishing you could take a bunch of meetings to the other side of it being like overwhelmed in a way, you know. It is that sort of just as having like no opportunities, it can be really trying. This may sound like really crazy, but I think on the other side of it, like the same is true, that like too much opportunity is also like equally overwhelming and kind of confusing, in that it's suddenly like, man, what do I really want to do? You know, and I found myself in a kind of like, I don't know, like just a place where I was like, I don't know, you know, like I wish I had a better answer for this, you know, because like, I mean, you know, how you guys know how reps are, you know, it's suddenly like, all right, like any meeting in town, like, what do you want? Like, you know, like that sort of thing. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think like there's a million things I would love to do, but like when push comes to shove, like time is really valuable. And I started taking some of those bigger meetings on, you know, like, again, sort of like dream projects. I just had to learn the same lesson very quickly that I learned like after my first time making the Blacklist, that OWAs are really hard and pitching movies is really hard, and doing a million meetings on a project that you don't control, even though it seems like you're heading down the right path, it is ultimately, I guess I would say, unfulfilling. And like, if you just want to put it in terms of like, what's your best chance to like get a movie made and have a script produced, like, I don't know, it may not, it's probably not the surest path, you know. So I found myself kind of like in a weird way back where I was like after making the Blacklist the first time, where I was like, man, like I'm not in final draft enough, you know, like I'm not doing what I love enough, which is writing scripts, you know, like I'm kind of on this endless path of like Zoom meetings, even though they are Zoom meetings with like, you know, dream projects, directors, IP, the whole deal, dream adaptations. It's still an OWA at the end of the day, you know, like even if it is a crazy dream OWA, it still is an OWA that requires you to do a lot of work before you're guaranteed anything, you know, before you're paid a cent, before they actually choose you to write the project. And I don't know, I found myself in a place of like, and again, this is just me, you know, like every writer is different. I mean, we all know screenwriters who like totally traffic within the studio system and IP and are just really good at it. And it may just be that like, that's not me. And that's okay. You know, I feel like a big part of it is like knowing yourself, and knowing when you work best and what conditions and routine gets like your best work out of you. And I found myself being really challenged with that again, you know, just like I was after like making the Blacklist for the first time. And it is that, you know, they're very different things. Like I love love to the blacklist and everyone out there trying to make it on it. I was that guy too forever. And, there was a little bit, I would say, of like, I would call it disillusionment, where like you're through the other side and you're like, wait, like the one goal I was working towards didn't solve all of my problems. Why? Like this isn't how it's supposed to be. Like this was the finish line. This is like this was the promised land. And look, like, it wasn't similar with the movie, but it was another sort of thing where it's like April 5th, the movie comes out and like the billboards are everywhere and it's so amazing. You're getting texts from like everyone you've ever known and it's a dream. And then like it's April 6th suddenly and it's like, what do I do now? It's like I'm still the same person. Like, why? Like, why do I still have all the same problems? This isn't fair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't solve. It doesn't. I don't know what the right word is. Like, it doesn't fill any of those gaps necessarily that maybe you thought it would. And again, like maybe I'm being way too cynical. But I do think it just gets me back to like that place where I've really gone to of sort of like this may sound super pretentious, but it's like you can't want to have done something, if that makes sense. Like you can't want to have made the blacklist. You can't want to like have a movie come out, like it's just like those are really hard goals because they're so like binary and a lot of it is out of your control. Whereas like, and again, this is I sound like really sort of like I don't know, like I'm into like zodiac signs, but it's like you can just say like I'm gonna write 5 pages today, like that is that sort of I think like I heard J.J. Abrams talk once about like the mountain problem, and how like you can't just say like I'm gonna climb a mountain today because it's just it's not doable. And that is why most people don't climb mountains, because it just seems really daunting and hard and there's no set path and it's like I can't do it today. I think of writing a script in a very similar way where it's like, you can't just say I'm going to sit down today and write a screenplay, right? Like you can't even say like I'm going to sit down and write a screenplay this week. I mean, you can, and there's a lot of people who brag about that on Twitter, but like I still am suspicious of like the quality of something you can write in just a week. It is that sort of like... At the end of the day, when all else fails, it's like I just have found that having a process mindset is always led to better results than being results oriented, and I'm generally happier for it. Sorry, that's like a really long and rambling.
No, we talk a lot about that on the podcast of how to break your goals down to as small as possible in order to actually accomplish the bigger thing and to let go of the stuff that's out of your control, which is getting a movie made. There's no way you could have controlled Ben and Matt getting attached to that movie and making it in July. That's impossible. You just had to focus on making the best script possible.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like, I mean, I find myself asking this to people a lot. It's like I want to make the blacklist. It's like, why do you want to make the blacklist? Like, let's break it down that way. It's like, well, because it ultimately always comes back to, I want to make the blacklist because it will lead to me being a successful screenwriter, right? So, like, in fact, what you can do is just remove the I want to make the blacklist part out of it and just change that goal to, like, I want to write a great script, that like, and that's what I always tell people. It's like, my job is the same as, like, my next goal is the same as every screenwriter's next goal, which is to write a great screenplay. Like, no matter what level you're at, whether, like, and that was my job when I was a sophomore in film school. It was my job when I was trying to get repped. It was my job when I was trying to make the blacklist. It was my job when I was trying to sell my first script. It was my job when I was trying to get a movie made. And, like, that just never changes, So, like, to me, it's more about, like, yeah, how can you like kind of reorient yourself so that the goal is always focused on like doing the best writing work you possibly can, and less kind of the like, trivial fleeting gold stars you get in Hollywood. It's like, because there are many of them, and I think part of it too is just like, when presented with chaos, like the human instinct is to try and impress order on top of that chaos. And to me, like, Hollywood is the ultimate chaos. It just is. Like, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no set path. So, like, our base human instinct is to say, like, how can I make sense of this, And we put these sort of little, like, again, like, steps along the road out there for ourselves. Again, like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just, having experienced a little bit, I think, like, at least for me, the priorities were in the wrong place, where it's just like it should have all been focused on the writing itself and less sort of, like these like check marks along the way, which, by the way, like sometimes you need those check marks, right? Like you need to get a manager or a rep of some sort. So like I don't fault anyone for saying like my goal is to get a rep, but the way to get that rep is to write a great screenplay, So it's like it's just like kind of the all roads lead to Rome type thing of this and that. Like all roads lead to writing a great script, no matter where, what, how you're working.
Yeah. I was gonna start breaking down sort of like the sections of your career and talk, because what you said I think is very true and very valuable to keep in mind, that upon success, it's not like everything is so breezy and easy now and my entire life has changed. I think I'm sure it's changed in some ways, but like the sort of famous example is Eric Heiser talking about after the success of Arrival during award season. He was like, great, like jobs are just going to come to me now and I no longer have to be in this rat race, right? And his reps were like, no, now you're in the rat race with other Oscar winners. He's like, what? So it just continues to get harder, but it's always the same thing. And I very much have had that experience as well, where it's like every time I hit a new or across a new hurdle, like I finally got my reps and like finally things will be easier, and it just never is. Finally I got my first gig, oh, it'll be easier. No, it never is. So it's very helpful to hear that that's sort of the same with this like huge hit that is AIR. But can we break it down smaller a little bit and talk about like the stages of your career, where so you on the blacklist, that definitely changes your career. More people are looking at you. There are more eyeballs on you. More people are requesting to read your material, whereas before they had no idea who you are. Can we talk just briefly about sort of how your career changed from Alex who is not on the blacklist to Alex who is now on the blacklist, in terms of like meetings you were getting and job opportunities that you were getting?
And I think all of these things, they're all opportunities, right? Like you're saying. I mean, I look at it like making the blacklist. It's a great achievement. It's an opportunity at the end of the day, because yes, you're off the blacklist, you start getting a lot more general meetings, right? You kind of do that first round of what they call the water bottle tour, where you're going and you're meeting execs all over town. And I mean, look, like again, every script and every person and every path is different. I think by and large, off your first time making the blacklist, those meetings are typically with like younger creative executives, which again, it's a great opportunity. But what looking back on, I would say I had the wrong mindset, right? Like I went in like these meetings are going to change my life. And like each one of these meetings, like I'm going to be their guy for whatever OWA they have, no matter what it is, no matter if I'm passionate about it. Like I'm just going to find a way to figure it out because I so badly want to be a working writer. And again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier of like having to like really look yourself in the mirror and be like, why do you want to do those things? Like, what are you ultimately chasing? I don't think AIR would have happened unless I did that round of, however many, 50 to 100 initial general meetings with younger creative executives, because, again, and this was really in 2019 and 2020 leading up to the pandemic, were these sort of, you take 50 to 100 general meetings. They're normally with younger creative executives. These are people who like really don't have buying power themselves, but they have the ability to take the script and just, kind of notch it one step up the ladder to people who do have buying power. So for me, it was a trying experience because my script Bagman, like I was really banking on that leading to work. It was a great sample for me. And I still hear about the script to this day, like 6 years later, but I've never made a cent off it, like, so it is that sort of, those were really trying years where it's like, God, like, I'm so happy to have all of these meetings and like to feel like I'm a working screenwriter, but I'm not a working screenwriter. Now, what I really should have been doing during that time was just working on my next spec, like I should have just spent those next 2 years writing my next spec. And instead, I spent them really focusing on these general meetings and like putting all my energy into those general meetings, and then off those general meetings, like trying to get the OWAs that each of those companies had available. Where really, like, to me, the right way to do it would be to take all those meetings, find your, look, you're going to take 100 meetings, maybe 20 to 25 of them are going to result in like long-lasting connections or long-lasting, what I would say, fans of your work, right? So 2.5 years later, or 3 years later, when we were going to take AIR out, the spec was called Air Jordan. we had our list of like 20 people, right? Who it's like, look, here are your fans across town. And that was just all from making the blacklist, taking those general meetings, figure out like, you know, kind of who you have that just, it's like speed dating, you know, like it's like, who do I have a connection with? And you know, it's just, it's not going to be with everyone, and that's fine. Just like dating, like there's not going to be that spark with every single person you go on a date with. It's like matching. So, and look, like one of those people, one of those 20 to 25 people is the guy that got AIR put together, you know, like he was like, I want to do this. You know, he ultimately got, you know, got the script to Ben, and that all came from just a general meeting I had 4 years earlier that I was kind of like, man, I just spent 3 hours driving from Silver Lake to West LA, taking the meeting, driving back, like decompressing. Like that's half a day, which is a long time, but 4 years down the road, that's the person that got AIR off the ground. So like, again, to me, the main thing in that first, like, you know, kind of intro to the industry in terms of like off the blacklist would be like, don't put too much pressure on yourself. You know, one, I would say dive right into your next spec. And again, whatever worked for you on that first blacklist script, like try to channel that again, right? It was probably something you were really passionate about. It's an idea that no one told you to write. You just kind of had the idea. It was a spec. Like just find another version of that instead of killing yourself over, you know, trying to put a pitch together, or like, okay, I'm not going to spend a month writing in this Word document for this random production company that has this podcast about, you know, a true crime in Idaho. Like, because I was that guy, you know, it's like, I've never been to Idaho. I'm not really interested in true crime, but I'll do it. You know, I'll figure it out. Like, I'll be your guy. Like, I'm a screenwriter. I can do this. Like, let's break this down. You know, who's the character? It's just like the passion isn't there, right? It's just you can't talk yourself into being in love, right? You're either in love or you're not. And I feel the same way about an idea, you know, like when I'm writing a spec or when I'm about to start a spec, the way I always think about it is like, let's play out this hypothetical world where I don't write this spec, right? And a year or two down the road, I wake up, I make my coffee, and I hit refresh on Deadline, and I see so-and-so writer has done this spec idea. Would I be in pain? Would I be in physical pain of like, God damn it, like I should have done that. Like, why didn't I have that idea? Why didn't I write that script? If the answer is yes, then you should write that spec. If the answer is no, like I'd be okay, like it is what it is, then you should not write that spec. And I think the same, I now think the same way about OWAs, right? Which is like, I have to be like, I mean, I'm trying to think of the right way to describe it. Like, I have to be head over heels, you know? I have to be like, there's just something inside me that says I have to write this script, you know? And this is how it was with like my second Blacklist script. The Stan Lee script was sort of like, everyone in the world smartly would have said like, don't write this script. It's kind of a waste of time. You're not going to be able to sell it. Sony has Stan Lee's life rights. Like, you know, you're really going to spend 6 months to a year of your life kind of for a script that you're never going to make money on. For me, it was like, yes, but there's just something where if I refresh Deadline and saw, you know, name a writer, Josh Hallman wrote the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby spec biopic, I would be like, oh my God, like I love that idea. That was such a smart idea. Like, you know, like, so write it. That's how I've looked at specs now, and that's really now how I'm trying to approach OWAs too, where it's like, you have to be like, you know, you have to be in love. That's really the best way I've found to say it, and like passionately in love, you know, like that crazy love that drives you crazy, you know, and you're thinking about all day, like that. Because life is short and OWAs take forever and specs take, you know, just as long in some ways and are even more frustrating because you're just kind of on a mountain on your own. You have to be doing it for love.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Josh is so fired up right now. You're speaking to our soul, Alex.
I know,
is
Alex.
what I'm saying.
Like, this is perfect. Yeah, you're speaking.
Look, it's hard. It's like I had to learn all of this the hard way, you know, like I did, and I tricked myself 10 different ways. Just like sometimes you trick yourself into being in love, you know. But like deep down, you know it and you feel it, or you don't. This was the thing with AIR is I had never had more fun writing a spec script. Like I really hadn't, you know. And it was that sort of. I didn't tell anyone I was writing it. It was kind of my secret, but like I would have just put it down if I wasn't having so much damn fun with it, you know? Like, it was that sort of nights and weekends project that I was like, I'm just loving these characters. I'm loving this world. Like, I'm obviously, you know, I'm a 90s kid from Chicago, so, like, the Bulls part is easy. But it was the best thing I was writing at the time, you know, even as impractical as it was. And so I chased that, you know, and like, maybe it's just a coincidence, but I just don't think it can be. The thing I hear more than anything about that script is I had so much fun reading it, you know? Like, whenever I had a general about AIR, it would always be like, I had so much fun reading that script. And it was like, that's because I had so much fun writing it, truly, you know? And, like, I don't believe in that whole, you know, like, woo-woo, like, you know, auras or anything like that. But it is, like, whatever energy and fun I was channeling into the page, it came out. It would channel the other way to the reader as well, you know? And I think the inverse is true, because we've all been there where it's like, oh my God, I have to rewrite this scene for the 25th time, and I'm so tired of these characters, and I'm banging my head against the wall. Like, I just think when you get there on a project, it's kind of doomed in a way, you know? Like, and the only way out is to return. It's like a bad relationship, you know? It's like you have to return to, like, what made you fall in love in the first place, you know? Like, what was it, you know? And find that sort of, like, essential whatever called to you about the character or the project in the first place. Like, that to me, because I've been there, you know? I mean, I'm writing a script now that is absolutely kicking my ass, and it's you know, it's just like returning to that initial spark or that initial bolt of lightning. That's like, you know, what struck me, and trying to channel that back into the like the scenes that are that are killing me.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if I ever asked you this. Did you meet Michael Jordan?
Have you? No, I didn't. But Ben did meet Michael Jordan. And this was like, and you know, you guys have been there and know the feeling of, like, you know, when they tell you, like, well, the project is like, the deal is done and it's gonna happen. Nothing is signed yet, you know, but don't worry, like, everything's gonna work out. So, like, for AIR, you know, like, I met with Ben in January, and everything was like, yeah, we're gonna do it. Like, it's all happening. But he said, I do want Michael Jordan's blessing to make the movie. But I don't want to go to Michael Jordan before I can tell him everything. You know, I can tell him what studio is going to finance the movie, and we're going to shoot it at this time. Like, I just don't want to go to him with a bunch of, like, buts, ifs, maybes. So, like, that will be the last step in the process. And I just remember thinking, like, sitting across from him during our first meeting thinking, like, this movie's doomed. Like, Michael Jordan is never going to give his blessing on this movie. I just, like, why would he? How do you even get to Michael Jordan? This is, like, the craziest thing I've heard. So, you know, in a way, it made, like, January, February, March of 2022 just these really, like, in a way, it was sort of painful, where it was like we were putting the movie together, but I just, in the back of my head, I was like, but, like, I just think, like, this could all fall apart at any second with Michael Jordan. And I had a very similar experience on my Stan Lee script, and it did fall apart, you know? So I had that sort of, like, nagging part of my brain being like, you have to keep working on the next thing, because this could be here today and gone tomorrow. And, you know, so be it. Like, and I've had it before, right? Where you have an A-list actor and they are so invested for a month and then they just jump off because, you know, they get offered some crazy other project, you know? And again, you don't blame them, but it's just like, such is the life of like a working screenwriter. And then I got the call, like, in that early April. It's like, yeah, Ben's on the plane right now. He's going to meet Michael Jordan. I was just like, oh my God.
That's so terrifying.
It was like the longest day of my life, man, because it was, I was just sitting, like, literally in this exact seat, like, all right, I'm going to just work on my next script and go about my day. But, like, you're just sweating bullets the whole time. And I was just thinking, like, you know, it's just, you just don't have days like that, 24-hour period like that very often, where it's like, either my first movie is going to be greenlit tomorrow or it's just not going to happen, you know? And I'm kind of back to where I was a year ago. It just was a really heady sort of thing. And, like, yeah, God bless, you know, I got the call. I'll never forget Ben calling and being like, we're good. There are a couple requests, like one being Viola Davis has to play his mom, which we'll figure out. And I'm saying, what? Like, we're supposed to start shooting in less than 2 months. So anyway, no, I did not meet Michael Jordan, but like, yeah, he very much gave his blessing on the movie, and he had, a lot of input in terms of, I mean, Viola Davis, obviously, but that's where Chris Tucker's character came from, and that's where Marlon Wayans' character came from, George Raveling, actually being in the movie. So, yeah, it was... again, I mean, as you know, Josh, like a 90s kid from Chicago, it's like that, it was very, heady to be like that one step removed from like the man who perhaps impacted my childhood, like more than my own father, like, it's like...
Of course. I mean, you should write your next script should be about you waiting for that call.
Dude.
All right, so that was a really good, bigger than snapshot image of what your career was like leading up to that. Now, in the post-AIR era, the movie has come out, award season, everything. You've done so many interviews about this in the press. What does your... Again, process stays the same. That's your true north. But what does the career part look like now? I'm sure it's another flurry of meetings like it was with the Blacklist, but no longer with creative executives who are on the lower end of the totem pole, but probably with like presidents, bigger studio execs. You're probably now meeting with bigger directors, etc. So can you, I guess, talk about what the career looks like now post AIR?
Yeah, it's... You just did a very good job of summing it up in 30 seconds, and now I'll take 10 minutes over explaining it. Yeah, it's a very similar process, just on, like, you just feel like, okay, you stepped up the ladder a little bit in terms of, like, the level of the meeting, right? You're now meeting with people who are buyers, who are, high up at studios, directors that can get a movie greenlit if they want to do it. Same with, like, talent, actors and actresses that, if they want to do the movie, it could get greenlit. Now, there's also danger in that, like we're saying, in that you get kind of sucked back into this cycle of, okay, like, wow, this is a really important meeting. I'm going to give it everything I have. And like, whatever, they have a book, they have an idea, they have a rewrite job that has been languishing for years at the studio. Like, I'll be the guy to figure it out. And, that can just be a really dangerous thing, because suddenly you're back in that place of, like we were talking about earlier, it's like, man, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't, like, I just haven't been in final draft enough, like I haven't been writing enough. And like, my job is a writer. It's not a professional meeting taker. It's not a professional Word document outline writer. It's like, my job is to write screenplays. So why the hell have I not been in final draft for 2 weeks? And I just get like really fidgety about that stuff. The other thing I'd say is that the meetings tend to be a lot more like project specific, like it's less, tell me about yourself and like, what's going on, like what are some of your other ideas? I mean, you still get that, but it is a lot more, like, you're meeting with this person at Warner Brothers because they want to talk about this specific script, or like this specific idea or this specific property, which like, that is, at least for that, like, you kind of know what the meeting is about and there's less like uncertainty. I will say the downside of it is, like, if you don't click on that idea right away, it is a little like, why are we having this meeting, sort of thing. And I think, you feel that from the other side more than than you feel it. And yeah, I mean, it's just that sort of thing where like you suddenly have a lot more opportunity, but it's not necessarily a good thing, because it's like, you have to be very picky and choosy, or like, your calendar can get filled up really quickly, and then suddenly you just haven't done the work, and the work is always the most important thing. The other interesting part I would say is that, at least I found myself getting, like more rewrite opportunities, where like off the Blacklist, I would get some, but they definitely were, I don't know, like just a little different than like now you kind of, there is that sort of like, they need a 2-week pass on this script, or they need a month on this script. And like, it's cool to be up for that stuff. I also think there is that same danger of like becoming a professional rewriter, and I think like, I mean, there was that big New Yorker article about Scott Frank, and I think he was really honest about, kind of falling into that cycle of like, taking big paychecks to work on other people's stuff, and just how, you do that for a string of years. It's really easy to look back down the road and be like, wait a second, like, what did I spend the last 5 years of my life doing? Like I haven't, like, it can be a dangerous road. The other thing is those meetings are more work, like you have to read the whole script and like come in with thoughts and like it is like this very particular kind of subset of the job. And I don't know, I found myself like, they're really enticing for sure, but at the same time, there's also that it's just like all of this is more work than you think it's going to be at first. It's like, oh yeah, it's a 2-week rewrite job, like perfect. I can kind of bridge the gap on some stuff, and then suddenly it's like, wow, I just spent 2 days reading this script, writing up notes on this script, thoughts on this script, and now like prepping for the meeting on this script. And then it's like you do that, and then they want to have another meeting with like their boss, and now it's suddenly like, wow, I've spent like 5 full work days on this job that was supposed to be a quick 2 weeks of my time, and we haven't even decided if I'm doing the job yet. It's like, and that stuff just happens on it can happen on rewrites, it can happen on OWAs, it can happen on like any of that stuff. So again, I have just tried to be like, yeah, unless I'm so in love with this that I feel like I have to do it, I'm just gonna keep working on my own stuff. Of course, there's a financial reality to it too, where it's like you got to pay the bills and you got to get a job eventually. So, I took out a pitch like post AIR and we got that set up. I'm still working on it, almost 2 years later here with the strike and everything. And, that's another one where it's like, man, that was a dream project I always talked about in generals. And it was always this sort of hypothetical, like I would love to do this, and I would always bring it up in generals like we're talking about, and then suddenly it's like, all right, someone's paying you to go do it, go write the script, and it's like, wait a sec, like, like it was
Never
really
mind.
easy. It was really easy to talk about as just like an idea that you would love to do, and then suddenly it's like, all right, yeah, you have to like the draft is due in 12 weeks, it's like, and you start to realize, wait a sec, like, yeah, this is actually a really big movie, and there's all these complications along the way that I hadn't really thought about when I was, giving a 2-minute pitch on it. And not to say like I am loving writing it, and we have a really exciting team on it. At the same time, it is that sort of, I found a lot in Hollywood. There is that sort of like, be careful what you wish for type thing. Like you may just get it, and it guess what? It may not solve all your problems, and it may be a way more work than you ever anticipated. And that's just a part of it, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is really like sort of like being self-reflective and looking in the mirror and being like, why do I want to work on the projects I say I want to work on, and what do I want to spend my time doing, and like that's at least for me, it was a very difficult question to answer, but it did kind of return to that sort of like, I like specking, and I like kind of just like being like out on the high wire, just trying to have the writing speak for itself, and the writing prove itself. At the end of the day, like that's our job. We're writers, and I think it's very easy to fall into a million different things in this career. But by and large, like I'm happiest when I'm in final draft. I'm happiest writing. I was going to say happiest having written, as the saying goes.
Yeah. I'm happier writing, to be honest. The having written, I don't understand that one. I love just being in final draft, as you're saying, and hammering it out.
No, I love it too. I mean, it is that sort of like, this is what I've told people, and it is that sort of like, after everything, and I plan to still have a very long career with like a lot more highs, but you never know. And it is sort of like after everything, when it's like, what am I going to remember most about AIR? It's like not necessarily, the red carpet and the crazy South by Southwest premiere, or like meeting Ben and Matt and being on set. Like I honestly, like, this is maybe crazy, but like, I'll just never forget cracking some of those scenes, like when it was just like up late at night at this exact table I'm sitting at now, like having a cup of coffee way later than I should at like 1 a.m. and being like, oh my God, like that's the plant and payoff I was missing, like that skateboarder outside in the parking lot. Like I could, if he comes in later, I can put him in the parking lot in that first scene with Phil Knight, and that solves my like my exposition problem of it being, two people in an office talking, or like,
right.
Like even Matt's speech at the end, like I just remember having that sort of like epiphany of like, oh, like they could flash in the future like that's just the stuff that sticks with me for whatever reason. Probably because I am like just a writer to my core, and like
Yeah.
those moments of epiphanies just always seemed like, I don't know, like clearing a fog in a way that the other stuff is like was really cool, and I'll never forget that either. But you know, that stuff is like here today, gone tomorrow. You know, like and the writing, the words are what last. You know, and like that those are the parts of the process where I'm like, okay, I can take this into my next script really, and like that part of the process I can repeat. Where like, yeah, like South by Southwest, I don't know if I can repeat that. I hope I can someday, but like that's out of my control. So I just like, I'm gonna enjoy that or not enjoy it and be super overwhelmed and anxious.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it's just that's an experience, and you just, you know, again, it's fleeting. So I just, yeah, try to stick to the page.
That's super cool. Okay, last question to wrap up, and this is a selfish personal question from me. What advice do you have for someone who has their first thing coming out? My first thing's coming out in October. What advice would you give me, Alex, to handle the flurry of public opinion that comes with it, the nerves that come with it, all of the stuff that comes with your first thing coming out? Hit me.
Wow.
Make me feel better.
Jesus. Here we go.
Stop and enjoy it, you know, and don't put so much pressure on yourself of, you know, is the movie going to be well reviewed? Is it going to, you know, is it going to do business at the box office? Are people going to like it? It's sort of, you know, I always say there are no finish lines in this business because there aren't. If there is any sort of finish line, it's a project to project finish line, and a movie coming out is that finish line for that project. So like, it is an accomplishment no matter what the movie is, where it's being released, who's releasing it. Like that is just, it's such a monumental feat that took so much time and effort that many people like that like you can talk forever about how long it took, but people still won't know just how much work it took. So like, just enjoy it, you know, and like that seems really kind of like trite and easy, but I find myself wishing I could go back in time and say that to myself too.
It's interesting. So at the Act Two mixer, I had a couple writers talking to me about their first project that came out, and how I was saying that I don't want to see mine in theaters, like with any, like, because my husband wants to have like a friends and family screening, and I'm like, absolutely not. I don't want to see it with anybody. I will be Johnny Depp and just never see it with other people. And then these other writers at the mixer were like, no, you have to. It's like a rite of passage, but B, if this is the only thing that ever gets made of yours, like God forbid, you will regret having not like lived in that moment. And that really struck me. However, I'm still terrified to see it with anybody, Alex, and I'm sure you saw it in theaters with many people.
Yes, I did have to stop actually like attending the screenings and sitting in on it, just because at some point like there's only so many times you can see a movie in a 4-month stretch, you know. It's just like, even if you wrote it, it's still a little like, all right, like I'm good, like I know this thing. I would say like, yeah, I mean, you have to think of like, you know, 15-year-old Tasha who said I want to go be a writer, you know, and like being able to like, not for you now, but for her, like go to the box office and buy a ticket for the movie like you always have, like when you were 15, and like you get to go see your movie. Like, come on, that's there's something really just special about that. And honestly, of all the times I saw AIR, you know, like the South by Southwest premiere was insane just because of like that audience and the room and the red carpet and everything. But like, I do think the quote unquote screening I'll remember the most is just going to AMC Century City and like firing up my AMC app and getting a ticket for AIR and just walking into the back row of the theater and just sitting there, you know, like that is, I think you do have to do that for sure. Like if that's the only time you see it, so be it. But I do think like, you know, you owe it to your past self and also your future self who's looking back 20 years from now, and you won't have to look back and say, I wish I could do that.
All right.
Beautiful.
All right, I feel that. Okay, thank you. I needed you. All right, let's wrap up with the quote of the day then.
Let's go.
I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Michael Jordan.
Let's go.
Please remember to rate and subscribe.
I
Follow
love
us
it.
at
I was like,
Act2.
what? I'm like, what screenwriter said that? He's so right. Turns out it was MJ.
Of course it was. Of course it was. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at Act2Writers for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I am Josh Hallman on Instagram, Joshua Hallman on Twitter. Alex, are you on social media? Where can everyone find you and bother you?
Yes, I am. I don't know why, but I am still on Twitter. I think it's just Alex Convery, and then Instagram, I think, is Alex Convery as well. But
Go
We're
find
still
him and
there.
bug him. No, don't bug him. Leave him alone.
yeah, I'll be off Twitter eventually. That's what I keep telling myself.
Same.
As always, the Act2 podcast is a production of Act2, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.